the federal government declared floating wind as the 5th U.S. Earthshot, as a key technology to meet our climate goals as well as our energy goals as a country. We have over 50 people, engineers, working on floating wind in this laboratory. So it's the largest concentration of floating wind engineers in the country and one of the biggest in the world.
Purple or the green when you do processing, can you move the natural frequency over?
The blue line, let's see, is the original, the original line. So it's a key technology for the future of humanity as we combat climate change. With 3% of the Gulf of Maine surface area, we can heat every home and drive every car in Maine. That's how big the resource is. Now let's move that to the country as a whole. Okay. In the United States, there's enough offshore wind capacity within 50 miles of the U.S. shores to power the country 4 times over. So it could be an important part of our future to combat climate change because of how big that resource is.
So this is actually how we're able to track the 6 degree of freedom motion. Mike's doing it.
It's a very carefully designed wave basin, we call it. We have 16 paddles on one end that can simulate the real ocean at scale. We typically test at 170 to 150 scale. Everything shrunk down by a factor of 50 or 70, all the dimensions. And we can replicate the waves as well at this scale. And you can prove out the system from a safety perspective. Is it moving too much? What are the loads in the tower? What are the loads in the mooring lines? You can measure these things, and then that gives a level of technical confidence.
It gives you an overlay of the markers and everything on it. So that's just really neat to see.
We're testing them to ensure their safety. So that's why they look frayed here. But if you look, you can see it. That's what they look like. And so they're very stiff. You can see I can barely move them. They're so heavy, they're heavy. So the risk of entanglement, that's a big question we get. Is a whale going to get entangled in this? This is the size of a telephone pole. It's a different scale than a lobster trap, which is maybe a ½ inch to 1 inch line. So. That's the advantage of offshore is there's 2 advantages. Better wind, and then you can move everything by sea. So you can have larger turbines. And the fewer number of turbines you put out there, generally, the lower your costs are because you're doing less picks, less bolting, less hookup and so forth, less cables. So the fewer number of turbines, there's an economy of scale. And at sea, you can move around with barges, right? You're not trying to truck them up or mount them. And in the water depths, typically the winds are better, so you get higher capacity factors for floating, typically, than you would on land. Land is where you have the lowest capacity factors because you have more obstructions in the wind, right? You have trees, you have mountains, you have hills. That all slows down the wind and makes it less of a desirable resource. As the further you go offshore, essentially the more often the wind's just howling and you get higher capacity factors.